All right, so I'm going to tell you about a time that I got the tray locked in the patient's mouth, and it was like the worst experience ever. And on top of that, it was actually while I was in dental school. So in dental school, my first all-on-4, all-on-X patient to restore, actually it was 6 implants in the maxillary arch. And before the patient's appointment, I did all my homework. I made a custom tray. I got all the parts, right, the impression copings, and I was ready to go. I seat my patient down, and I go ahead and I put all the impression copings on the implants, right? Put my impression copings on. Before I take my impression, my instructor advises me to make a verification jig, but it wasn't any ordinary verification jig. He actually had me place burr shanks. So you know, like a regular lab burr. I'm going to show you, like a lab burr, like this end of this thing right here. He had me cut it and use it to connect all of the implants together. So this is a verification jig. Of course, you know what it looks like, but he had me reinforce that with burr shanks. And so this thing was like indestructible. Like it would survive World War II. It was really crazy. Anyhow, I take my custom tray afterwards, try it on. It's seating fine. I fill it up with PVS, and then I seat it. Shortly afterwards, I take my, I start unscrewing it, and then I make sure everything's unscrewed, and then I pull on the custom tray. As I pull, the patient's head like pulls with it, right? So I'm pulling, the patient's head's moving too, and I just can't get this thing out. It's just straight locked in. My instructor thinks that it's because I haven't fully tightened the screws, or unscrewed the screws, and so we actually take the screws out, pull on the tray, thing's still locked in. So now what to do, right? Normally you would cut the tray out, but this tray is crazy reinforced, and sorry, not this tray, the jig is crazy reinforced, and then the custom tray is pretty rigid and strong too. And so it was a big mess, right? I seated the impression at 3 o'clock, and I was there all the way until 7 o'clock at night. The reason that happened, I'm going to show you why that happened actually. So this is what the impression should have turned out like, right? This is how the impression should have looked with 6 implants beautifully in place. Sadly, this was not the impression. Actually, my impression came out in segments because I had to cut that out. And while I was cutting it out with the disc, you know, sparks are flying everywhere, acrylic fumes are going everywhere. That's just kind of like how you bail yourself out of a tray that's locked in. You have to cut the tray out, and if it's reinforced with burr shanks, like my instructor suggested, then you're going to have a hell of a time cutting that thing. So anyhow, I'm going to tell you why that happened. The reason that happened is because I was restoring implants to the implant level, right? I wasn't restoring them on the multi-unit level. If you use a multi-unit abutment, like I suggested in this course, you're not going to have this problem. But just in case, so sometimes there are situations where you can't use a multi-unit. Like if you don't have that much restorative space, you sometimes can't use a multi-unit abutment. But if you don't use a multi-unit abutment and you're restoring straight down to the implant level, you're going to be using an impression coping like this. So this is open tray impression coping. This is what mine looked like. And impression copings have something on them. They have this thing right here. This is called the engagement, right? So this part where the impression coping goes down into the implant and engages so it can't rotate. Now that's great for crown and bridge. It's great for single implants, but for full arch, if you have every implant engaging, so if you have every impression coping engaging on your implants, and there's even a little bit of divergence, those engagements, so this thing that you see right here, this little hex that you see down that goes into the implant, that gets locked in. So instead, if you're restoring down to the implant level, so if you're not using multi-unit abutments, the thing to use is not an impression coping. You should use a temporary abutment. So use a metal titanium temporary abutment that is non-engaging. So that's basically, looks like this, except for they don't have this part right here. They don't have this little hex down here that gets locked inside your implant. So if you're going to take impressions down at the implant level, use temporary titanium abutments non-engaging, right? But anyhow, whenever you can, always use multi-unit abutments. These are the multi-unit abutments right here. Always use those because they just make life so much simpler. All right, just wanted to share that with you. I hope that helps.